Why is brand awareness so important?
Our team was handicapped already by going out and not having a lot of time to spend with customers. Our brand awareness, our brand attribute association just skyrocketed. That's because we did the research up front to understand what the customers needed, what they wanted to hear or needed to hear.
Welcome to LifeSci Continuum. I'm Bill Schick, your Fractional Chief Marketing Officer. Today we're digging into the 3 big ideas that decide whether your launch stalls or scales, why voice of customer isn't optional, and how leaders get it wrong, and the hard truth that even big brands struggle to sell without the right story and targeting.
You can really understand what makes your customer segments tick, and you can also begin to think about what position do we really want to own in this market space. Right now, we're just throwing spaghetti on the wall and hoping that it sticks. So I remember we didn't have a position, we didn't have any positioning statements, we didn't really have any message architecture.
See, too many teams think they can optimize later, but if you skip real customer insight and rely on proxies, you'll burn money, misread demand, and make it harder for sales to break through. So today we'll look at how you turn evidence-based marketing into revenue, even in regulated niche markets. To unpack this, I invited David Kern, executive marketing leader across biotech, pharma, and medtech, a former client and now a good friend.
When we just execute and don't necessarily understand our customers, we're just going through the motions.
He's led multi-million-dollar budgets and delivered award-winning strategies by aligning cross-functional teams around data and not wishful thinking.
And avoid reaching out to your KOLs that are going to give you the answer that you want to hear, because it will skew your entire marketing campaign to what you think you want to do and to what you think is right.
By the end of this episode, you'll walk away with the toolkit for running practical voice of customer, what to ask, what to avoid, and how to kill bias, using education-first social to create demand without a hard sell, and giving sales what they need before they knock. Clear positioning, realistic targeting, and measurable signals that shorten the path from first touch to closed won. All right, let's get to it. Thanks for hopping on with me today. Looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, we've worked together a bit in the past, and we've had some good conversations around digital marketing, voice of customer, taking products to market. And I think today you want to talk a little bit about voice of customer work and why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the cornerstone, I think, of what marketers really need to do to have effective campaigns and understand where they're going with their markets.
Is that your particular superpower?
I would say yes, really trying to understand what is motivating the customer base, the customers we're trying to reach to, and really trying to build a robust plan that articulates the brand and the company position to meet those needs that you've uncovered through voice of customer. And voice of customer spans a pretty broad spectrum of your classic brand marketing, your medical marketing, messaging, positioning. So voice of customer is really a crux of identifying how it is you want to approach the business and what problem you're trying to solve for, how you want to meet the needs of your target audience. So yeah, I think that's a great place to review and discuss.
Is there a particular other story or scenario where you could point to it and say, so this is what I'm passionate about, and here's an example of it, like it just clicking, and the benefits, or however you would share that?
A couple of companies ago, a very large company, we were in a very crowded market space, and I would say market research, voice of customer, during our annual budgeting process was always the first thing to get cut. And because I think senior leadership was trying to make a budget goal, right, like we all are. Mm-hmm. If you haven't worked in this capacity and you're just looking at your numbers, voice of customer just sounds sort of nebulous, if you will. It's kind of out there. What does it really mean, and how do you execute against it? However, the organization somehow came to terms with understanding the importance of really doing the hard work up front. And they actually put us through what I would call a boot camp. And I won't name names, but this person is who led this course is very prevalent on LinkedIn, just a phenomenal individual in terms of teaching, educating individuals within different marketing classes of products. And it sort of revolutionized how we thought about our business. And his mantra was really understanding what the market needs are through key market research, and then developing from there. And that was sort of the basis of that aha moment from a case study perspective.
Just like from your perspective, when we talk about voice of customer, how do you define that?
I define voice of customer. There's a couple different ways I define it. One is from a quantitative perspective, when you're going out to your target audiences, because you could be communicating to the general public, you could be communicating to physicians, decision makers. So it's a little bit different in terms of your voice of customer audience, and you want to tailor, I think, your research and approach to that. So I think about it from a quantitative perspective, where we're trying to identify key correlations between their intended thoughts or their intended actions and their actual behaviors. And another piece of that would be, the qualitative aspect of it, which is really getting in and doing I call it rolling up your sleeves. We some joke, sitting behind the glass, really asking the questions, having the discussion from a qualitative perspective. So it's pretty basic, but it's the old classic quantitative and qualitative approach to identifying.
Yeah. We see a lot of companies tend to just not even consider doing it, or like you said, when they're looking closely at budgets, being frugal, maybe cutting it. And why do you believe that voice of customer is important?
I believe voice of customer is important because in the whole marketing planning continuum, it establishes all of your strategies and tactics that are going to help you achieve the goals and objectives that you've set forth. I think many times, and I'm as guilty as this as anyone in this space, is kind of beginning with the end in mind and just focusing solely on that, just focusing solely on executing. And when we just execute and don't necessarily understand our customers, we're just going through the motions, I believe.
As an example, I currently have a client where, they've been with me for a few years now. And in the first year, one of our recommended tactics was paid promotion in social media. And for a med device company, whose audience is pretty narrow, they couldn't really wrap their heads around it. They'd never done digital marketing at all. And they just felt like, well, our users aren't on Facebook, to quote them. And what we were trying to tell them is that the customers were telling us this is where they're spending their time and where they get a lot of their information, not Facebook specifically, but social media, different channels. And they were really resistant for about 6 months. And every conversation that we had, they're like, we're spending a lot of money here. We're not, we haven't made a sale. And in medical devices, that's kind of they're always kind of looking at where the leads are coming in, where the new business is, and what accounts they're bringing in. And what we were able to do is show them the data. We came into a meeting after 6 months, and they said, we've just unilaterally decided to cut this part of what we're doing, and we want to redirect our resources elsewhere. And then I pulled up their dashboard that they have access to, and I scrolled to the social media activity, and it accounted for about 77% of the traffic and activity that was driving awareness of their thought leadership team and getting, filling that funnel for them. But they just didn't have visibility. They didn't have the experience. And without those things, they also weren't listening to the customer. And so it is important as part of your work. If you're spending your time, promoting through channels where your customers aren't, you're just wasting like you said, you're going through the motions.
Bill, that actually, when you and I worked together, you triggered a memory in the whole digital marketing efforts that we deployed. And I think that was a really strong success. And that is one area where I think it took a while for senior leadership to get their heads around it. and it really articulated just as you described, where this whole digital marketing, social media, it's not, it's too large. How do you really laser focus into it? And, I distinctly remember the initial research that we did together. I mean, I remember just literally writing the questions with you to really get
Yep.
to the point of what are we trying to understand with our customers. And we designed what I consider to be a really robust campaign around that from a digital perspective. And if you remember, what we found from the research is, our customers didn't know even what our brand name was. Our brand awareness was so low. And when they could identify our brand attributes, they associated them with our competitor. So we had no brand
Right.
recognition, and when we did have brand recognition, they were applied to our competitor.
Mhm.
And you wisely brought forth, hey, these digital efforts. It was very, I think, it was approached with a very cautious lens from senior management, because they didn't necessarily believe that our customer base had the time to spend time scrolling on their phones or looking at social media, or were interested in it. But if you recall, we ran that campaign for a period of time, and our brand awareness, our brand attribute association just skyrocketed. That's because we did the research up front to understand what the customers needed, what they wanted to hear or needed to hear, and then we were able to show senior leadership the results of those interactions and how much it improved our overall brand attribute scores.
Yeah, and I remember that well. It's a really great case study because um, I think when people think about paid promotion on social media, they think about putting a product out there, like a product features video. Like, here's our product, here's what it can do, buy it. And that's not how that works. What we found and what we applied in this situation was really leading with education, and rather than you know kind of jamming the product out there, we led with the science behind why your market was experiencing some of the pain points they were experiencing, like what drives that, what the cost of that is, and just educating them on something they just didn't get, and then leading them through breadcrumbs to the product conversation. So we talk about things like brand awareness, in this space, just to kind of hammer it home. Why is brand awareness so important? Quick interruption. I've got an offer for med device and life science companies doing at least 3 million a year, but dealing with growth challenges. The first step is really easy. Just connect with me on LinkedIn. The details are below. The rest is to follow. That's it. Let's get back to the podcast. Why is brand awareness so important? Why was that key to this, maybe in this particular situation, especially?
It was, key for a lot of different reasons, but when I try to distill it down to why it was so important is because one of our competitors was a behemoth, and we were just kind of chipping away at Mount Everest, right? We're at the base and they were at this colossal mountain. And when our customers didn't even know that we existed, it was hard for our field team, who are out communicating to our customers, to even begin to have a discussion or dialogue with our customer base. So when our team was handicapped already by going out and not having a lot of time to spend with customers in the first place, people are very busy, and you're already beginning in a place where no one even knows who you are, and
Mm-hmm.
it just propagates from there. It's very challenging to overcome that until you build that base of awareness.
I actually remember the meeting where this all came up, because we were sort of we have a process and some frameworks that we go through, and we were beating our heads against the wall a little bit in trying to get to um, what it was that we needed to communicate to really get into the heads and stay there. I mean, and typically in the work we do, the audience is They're critical thinkers. They're really smart. They're independent. They want to figure it out themselves. They don't want to be sold to. And you're right, they are really, really busy. And so we had to figure out exactly what it was that would kind of check all those boxes and get them to start warming up to considering really changing a key part of a procedure they were doing. And in the call with the sales team, I sort of, and this was off the cuff. This is a question that I'd never asked before, but in the moment, it sort of hit me with all the challenges the sales team was having. Like you said, it was getting harder. I think at the time, it was almost impossible to get into physically in the door into a healthcare system, into a hospital. And if you were able to at all get some kind of connection there, get some kind of meeting, wow, you had very little time. And so what we found is that, the question was, what do you wish? And this was to the salespeople. What do you wish they knew before you walked in the door? And there were two answers to that. One, I wish they knew who we were.
Right.
And I wish they understood the science of what we're doing, because we were built to solve this big problem in the market. And we thought about that a bit. And for us, we can't just go out and, with, I guess, limited budgets, we can't just splash the name everywhere, because first of all, it's a waste of money. Second, nobody cares. There's so much noise out there. So if we just throw that name out there, I mean, we could hammer home repetition, but the cost to the company to get that to happen and the impact of it, it just doesn't make sense. So what we decided to do was lead with educational content first. And then, of course, feeding it through social media. Why would we do that? It was a multifaceted campaign. So we got it in the hands of the sales team, and, it was on the website and things. But in social media, we can target the audience pretty closely and put that out there in front of them. And since we're treating it as education first and it's not promotional, it taps into that natural curiosity and leading with a problem. So are you experiencing this problem, and are you kind of tired of it, and do you want to fix it? Here's the science behind why that happens. And there's new science and new technology to address that. And then we eventually get down to the product, but we're tapping into their natural curiosity and problem solving thinking. And I remember that was, without getting into the details, that was insanely effective in that first salvo, if you will, of getting out there.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I remember this like it was yesterday, in terms of before really implementing a robust voice of customer program. The science that was attempting to be communicated was very complex, very disjointed, very hard to understand. And through the voice of customer, we were able to really distill that messaging down, really distill the educational down to what was most important to the customers. I mean, I remember just getting way down into the weeds of just cellular biology. That was like, no, nobody, we were way too deep for this audience. We raised and simplified our approach, and it was, to your point, very effective.
Yeah, I think at one point when we were looking at creating assets, we were landing in the land of 15 to 20 minute explainer videos. We're like, they're never going to watch this. It's too long. It's too deep. There's a little bit of a hook, but it's not quite there. And where we ended up with was it was just shy of 2 minutes.
That's right.
I think our target was 90 seconds, but wow, we could not squeeze it in. But when you're framing out an entire story, so starting with a problem, agitating the problem, explaining kind of why it's happening and kind of bigger implications for the patient and for the doctor and for the hospital system, that's a lot to tell in a short period of time. And I think at a couple of different levels, one of the challenges I think we ran into is there was an initial mandate to make the presentation, like even just the medical animations, look as realistic as possible. And that was something that took a lot of coaxing to say we're focusing on the wrong thing. My experience has been is if you're too close on things like the presentation, like it looks, you get the animation 3D and hyper realistic. If it's actually too realistic, but it's not quite there, the audience starts critiquing the presentation of the information, meaning that, that isn't exactly there and that doesn't look like that. And they're not actually listening to the message anymore and it's distracting. So we decided to move in the opposite direction. And we're not getting into one of those silly whiteboard videos, but simplifying it down to just the elements we needed to tell the story without it being distracting. And so the visuals supported the science. They didn't get in the way of communicating the value. And that's a small detail, but it's core to, I think, what we want to do, which is don't let the vehicle get in the way of the message that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, that's well said. And voice of customer research can be humbling as well for the team, right? For the marketing team, for our advertising partners, because we can come in with our own preconceived notions, and I'm highly guilty of this, and thinking that it's going to be just this phenomenal message, deliverable strategy, and it's really, if you don't have that voice of customer, you aren't able to pivot, adjust, and make it for what the customer needs. We're kind of stuck with our hubris with what we think is correct, but a lot of times isn't.
Right. So let's talk. We've sort of talked around it a little bit, but so voice of customer for this particular story, we didn't lead with voice of customer. Initially, it wasn't on the table as part of the budget or the strategy. We, in our work, we had noted that typically we would have a little bit more conversation, but initially, senior leadership and the sales team acted as a proxy for voice of customer. And that really drove some of the initial work. And then further down the line, I think you really spearheaded this for this client and said, we need this. We need to get our KOLs in here. We need to hear, what the market is saying. We need to get out there with people who don't know us, and get them talking. So maybe talk a little bit about getting that going.
Yeah, that was a lot of, I guess, uphill work in the beginning, right? It was, I think you said it well, and getting that whole voice of customer, I think, initiative in place. A couple different ways we've got that done. One, I remember I convinced a few folks, or we convinced a few folks, that let's at least talk to maybe 5 or 6. Let's get an initial, qualitative sample with our customers. And I remember that was not an easy conversation either. And it's a smaller company, so I understand the budgets are tight, but hoping to understand the bigger picture. So let's just start really small and at least build a case around that. And just from those initial interactions with that one-on-one interviews that we did, I think really opened the eyes to a lot of senior leadership that, wow, they don't know who we are, they don't know what our brand stands for, and they couldn't pick us out of a lineup with our competitors, So it was eye-opening. And it's also eye-opening for senior leadership when they've got, budgetary objectives to meet, and you're trying to influence your share price, especially when you're a small startup organization. So to them, I think that was a very intriguing proposition of, okay, this is what our customers have said. Then we're able to actually share with them some case studies from previous organizations that I had worked at. I know you brought in some examples of work that you and your team have done in the past that really demonstrated that if you do an effective voice of customer program, you can really understand what makes your customer segments tick. And you can also begin to think about what position do we really want to own in this market space. Right now, we're just throwing spaghetti on the wall and hoping that it sticks. Though I remember we didn't have a position, we didn't have any positioning statements. We didn't really have any message architecture established. And if we did, it was just sort of loosely thought about or loosely considered. So it was just a lot of tactical execution, spaghetti on the wall. So I think being able to, I know I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but being able to uh, get that initial buy-in to at least let us talk to some of our customers in a qualitative format, and then let's go from there. And I think that it just snowballed from there into more qualitative focus groups, additional large quantitative. I think we did an ATU, which no one really knew what that meant in the organization. That took some convincing as well, and that just spearheaded everything. And you saw what happened was a hockey stick in terms of our awareness, and most importantly, our utilization of our product went up as well dramatically. So it really worked.
Absolutely. You made a really great point with brand awareness, and that maybe leadership didn't have necessarily the right read on how much the market knew or understood about us. And that's important, because regardless of the industry we're in, and even on a personal level, we buy products from people we know, we like, and we trust. You talk to any good salesperson out there, and they will tell you they can sell much more easily into an account that knows the company, that they have a relationship with. It's why companies hire seasoned sales reps with connections, because it's easier to sell to the people you know. And what building the brand does is it softens up the market. It warms them up before you go in and try to, I mean, even just switching to a very similar product, it's the same in every way. There's just this one little tweak we made that makes our product better than that one. Yeah, but I don't know you. You
Right.
just showed up. You're a startup. You just showed up yesterday. Why should I trust you? And then the bigger picture piece of it is you're not just selling to that person. You're selling into a system that's built to keep you out.
Right.
There's this idea that a lot of founders are clinicians. They see a problem, and they're like, why are we doing it like this? Why haven't we addressed this or fixed it? And then they go and they work with an engineering team, and or they tinker in their garage if they're predisposed to that. And then they think, well, I'll just walk in and show other clinicians what I have here, and they're just going to fall over themselves. They're going to, the whole Kevin Costner build it and they will come.
That's right.
They don't. The system, it's not just the other clinician. Your average other user likes what they're doing. They're used to it. They know it. They trust it. And when you're trying to introduce something and you don't have like the cloud of a big brand behind, even when you have a big brand, sometimes it's really hard to get through all that noise. And it's not the one person that you're selling to, it's the whole system. That person then has to be your advocate internally. And that's where understanding the brand and the story behind what you're doing really gives them the tools and maybe that extra little push to stand up for you in a system that's really designed to keep you out.
That's right. And you probably remember this well, is that for a period of time, Bill, there was actually some momentum within some of the leadership team that we will approach this market as a classic Me Too. And it's hard to be a Me Too, just as you said, when you're going against systems that are designed to keep you out. And they were relatively happy with the current product they were using. And again, that current product they were using was being sold by just a behemoth organization. So yeah, don't need to go down that. Obviously, that thought process, we were able to deter, based on our voice of customer research, we were able to deter distractors or proponents of that approach.
Yes, with our experiences, we've seen a lot of things go really well and things go really wrong.
Right.
And we can look at a product, we can look at how we're positioning it, we can look at the pathway for the evolution of that product. And we can say, sometimes with data, sometimes intuitively, we might not want to head down that road. But at the end of the day, we're sort of smaller voices in the room. There are other things driving. There are people at the table that you never meet, and have a lot of influence in these things. And what I think where you're getting to with voice of customer is when you hear your customer say, yeah, I don't want that. I need this.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use it that way. I would use it this way. They're telling you how the real world is going to respond to, react, and leverage your solution. And you have to work in the real world. We can't have this magical thinking of, here's what I think about it. And so projecting that onto everyone. And we see that time and time again.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
And yeah, and I think too, when you're kind of a small, scrappy startup, I think chasing a Me Too path, there's no path there. You can't beat a big established incumbent by being that small unknown and saying, well, we do the same thing.
Right. we're just as good with a lot less resources and support.
Right. So I think that's a tough place to be. If you were to give some advice on maybe convincing a senior leadership that just simply doesn't think they need voice of the customer, they know better, what might you recommend to somebody earlier on in the process that needs to make that argument?
I would literally try to get, maybe in an unauthorized manner, a smaller pool of insights from your customers, whether it's via a phone call to a senior leader, whether it is like we did, 5 or 6 individuals to say, hey, let's just get a proof of concept here that we're going down a path that we don't want to go down if we want to be sustainable. It's not necessarily a covert operation, or what's the word, skunk operation, skunk works. But you can start small. You don't need to do a grandiose study right out of the gate to demonstrate your point. You can start really small and build from there. That's the advice I would give.
Yeah, so I can think of 2 examples of really, really tangible things that to do that are really generally low or no cost. The first one is if a company has someone like you, in the product marketing role, kind of leading the charge on this, and you have a network, you have people that you've worked with before. I have another fractional CMO that I work with. We partner up sometimes, and he just has a network of surgeons on like speed dial. And he simply, he doesn't pick up the phone. He just texts them a message like, hey, Dr. So-and-so, when you have a second, I have a quick question for you. And he's built those relationships over time. And it's not something that a lot of us have the benefit of just simply because we may be new to this. We're just not there. So if you're not the one who has access to that, those network effects, knowing someone who does have that and can ask just a simple question just quickly. The other thing is a little bit more tangible and maybe scalable for some different things. And that is running a quick, 1 question survey in a social platform. And that can be really, really telling. They're easy to answer. They just scroll through your feed and you see the question and you just answer it. And you can gather quite a bit of data very, very quickly in a short period of time. I like that a lot. And I just want to kind of come back to that. Why social media for our market? We tend to think of, we compartmentalize. Here's my business time. And this is when I'm focused on the work that I do. And if I'm in surgery, 80 of my 50 hours, of course I'm not on Facebook. Okay, sure. But social media is the outside of work time. It's the I'm watching my kid's soccer game. I'm kind of standing in the crowd, sort of at the edge of the field, and maybe it's a little quiet right now, and I'm kind of scrolling through my feed and on Instagram. And yeah, if you throw your product in the middle of that, you're just going to scroll right by. But if you're throwing in something that is educational, or engaging, like a quick poll or a survey, it doesn't sound terribly interesting, but it really, really works, because you're catching them when they're available in the platforms where they are.
That's right.
So those are some things that can really get this thing moving quickly.
Driving in this morning, I know we were having this conversation, so I was a little more aware of my surroundings in terms of what people were doing as they're walking down the street or walking to a bus station. Not one person at a very busy bus station had their head up looking around. Every single person literally was in their phone. It's just remarkable. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. That's very well said.
Yeah, and that's why we spend, sometimes to the irritation of my clients, but we spend so much time focusing on what's going to show up. And they're just like, we just need brand awareness, put our product out there to just see it a million times. And that's not engaging. That's not memorable. It's so hard to cut through the 6 million. What do we get? 6 million messages a day now. I just don't even know what the stat is anymore. But, you just imagine how much you're scrolling through. So we spend so much time figuring out exactly what it is we want them to understand, learn, or engage with. And then the hook, the thing, that scroll stopping moment that gets our attention. There's so much garbage on social media to filter through. So it's really, really key. So we talked a little bit about recommendations on sort of getting that across. What about starting up? I mean, we went through quite an exercise in putting together the questions that we ask during voice of customer interviews or surveys or things like that. Anything that you've specifically seen go well, or maybe that was less helpful, you thought would be really, really compelling, and you're like, this was a dud?
Yeah, that really taking the time and working in a collaborative manner with not only your colleagues, but also with, people like you, Bill, and your team. I think that was really the most rewarding aspect for me, in terms of starting out, like really getting the questions dialed in, and then testing those questions to make sure that there were the right questions. So really spending the time up front to make sure that you're bringing your best foot forward and asking, the question behind the question. And as you said, you can have a really impactful one question survey that could be more impactful than a 25 question survey that by the time someone gets to the bottom of it, they're just kind of checked out, which was a good learning for me, right? We all want to do these 100-page surveys that have all these correlations, and you can do those as well, but it's really starting up, doing the hard work up front, and then testing it to make sure you're on the right track.
Yeah, it's the other side of the, these are really busy individuals. They're too busy to be on social media, but let's put together a survey that's like 3 hours long. Right. There's no way. They're just going to open that up and see page 1 of 33 and be like, I'm out. Yeah. What I've seen work really well is using, are you familiar with the 5 Whys framework?
Oh, yeah.
So when we're putting something together with voice of customer, doing our initial swing at the questions and the information we want to learn, but also kind of whittling it down to what we really, we have what we want, but what do we really need to know here? What is going to be the most valuable in whatever exercise we're doing, whether it's we're going to market or we're looking at the future pathway of this particular product. What do we really need to know? And using that framework to get to the core, the heart of the problem or the heart of whatever the situation is. Because what I see a lot of companies doing is they get a bunch of people in the room and they just brainstorm all these questions and then they throw them into this survey, and we're good to go on our voice of customer. And getting into the why, why are we asking that, and what is the point, and just keep going to why do we need to know that, and really pushing and sharpening the pencil. And oftentimes internal teams lack maybe the bandwidth or that external non-biased view to push on those things and lean on those things. It's more of I have a million things to do, let's just get this thing out the door. And we just torpedo the entire effort, and we get some responses, but those responses drive a lot of what we do. So it's important to get the best information.
Absolutely. And I know we didn't get into another, what I think is a critical element of voice of customer, and that is, and we've spent a lot of time on this as well with you, Bill, is really understanding our customer segments. And I know segmentation isn't necessarily as sexy as people thought it used to be, but I might disagree with that. Maybe they're micro segments now because there is so much noise out there. But if you're just throwing your messaging out there and casting a broad net, and I guess it depends what market you're in, and where you're at in your life cycle of your brand. But if you're a small startup company, you've got to be pretty laser focused with your resources. Yeah. And if you don't really understand what those key customer segments are, they don't need to be, someone who has, dark hair, wears a blue shirt, and hops on one leg. That doesn't need to be that specific. You can have more general segments to be effective.
Yeah, those also don't really apply to us
right.
What we're doing. I mean, it's like are you working in a complex, healthcare system with multi, tiers of decision making and arguing going on and budgeting, and you have to factor those things in. Even sometimes looking at maybe what common workflows are, because sometimes an existing workflow within a system will be resistant to introducing anything that's going to upend that cart, because getting those workflows approved, there's a lot of complicated pieces that you have to overcome, and people and personalities. So the segmentation is really key here. This is kind of I love and hate this moment when we were working together, but there was a moment when, and I just cringe to tell this story, it's going to hurt a lot right now, but we were presenting, reporting the data to a campaign, and what we were against our projections versus sort of where we were at in getting to that goal. And we were talking, and you were very polite and quiet, and then we stopped talking, and then there was still quiet. And looking back on it, I know you were looking for the way to say it to not hurt our feelings, but you were looking at, you're like, I wonder if we could look at that target audience number again. And so I looked at it again. Now we know there are maybe 7,000 people in North America that would use our product. In the meantime, up on screen, we have 1 million potential users. And I was just like, that was like a big swing and a miss. My team is like, oh no. So we don't always get it right all the time, but it is important to know. And I do tell that story frequently. It's like we mess up sometimes, but you were so gracious. Like you were just like, we might want to look at that number again.
Well, I appreciate that, and but that's that goes into the relationship as well, because we do get things wrong collectively, as a group, and being able to respectfully challenge one another a lot of times is where we come out with the magic, where we can accept the challenge. And Bill, I don't know if you remember this or not, but it speaks to kind of what you're talking about when we did the voice of customer, and we really uncovered a very viable segment, which we weren't even looking for. And there were a group throughout the country, pockets of very influential practitioners that were still in a private practice setting. They weren't part of a large hospital base. And because they were so influential within those systems, and because they brought in so much business to those systems, they had a lot of sway in terms of what products were brought in. That wasn't even on our radar. We were so focused on the health systems and the providers within the health system that we didn't identify these areas of key influence within those rare cases where there were private practice settings with 2, 3, 4 practitioners that carried huge influence. And that really turned the tide for us in a lot of big markets, just having view into those segments.
Yeah, because you can get a lot of information on what's happening in kind of the bigger environments from sort of those micro interactions and those things. So yeah, that is key. What's one thing that you would recommend maybe people avoid when doing voice of customer?
Avoid going into your voice of customer or establishing your voice of customer program, your research tools, and your questions to give you the answers that you want to hear. And avoid reaching out to your KOLs that are going to give you the answer that you want to hear, because you will skew your entire marketing campaign to what you think you want to do and to what you think is right. Go on with an open mind.
Yeah, we want to avoid bias. I think sometimes people do just want to hear that what they're doing is the right thing. I think we all want that, right? Ultimately, we want to hear good job. We want validation. But in this case, I look for, and this is always really hard. This is a challenge. But hey, who didn't buy from us? Who didn't pick us? Why didn't they buy? Oh, I don't know if I want to go back to them.
Right.
That's where the information is. Why did we fall down? Why didn't we win in that case? And I think that's really tough. So I think that's a good point. Avoid bias. Don't just tap into those. Especially, I think with KOLs are tough,
right,
because KOLs are essentially your early adopter. They are the ones who maybe if they'd taken a right instead of a left one day going to work, they could have been the one to say, you know what, this is a problem. I think, why don't we have a solution to it? I think I could, but they didn't. You did. And so they're one step away. They get it. They believe in it. They're primed and ready, and they're wired differently than your average user who just goes about their day saying, oh, well, I have to deal with this again, but that's how we've always done it. So I think it really is important to avoid that kind of bias and the self-congratulation in when you're trying to figure out, what does the market need? What do they want? And how do I meet those needs?
That's right.
All right, Dave, this is great today. Thanks for hopping on with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. This was a lot of fun, and it's great to talk with you again.
If you made it here, thank you. If you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you want to learn more about this topic, I expand on it below, as well as in my LinkedIn newsletter. That's all for now. More soon.